Now we're going to update the logic behind our space data table view controller, because obviously we don't want our space data table view controller to display the string of data 5 times. First, let's go to our storyboard and update our prototype cell a little bit, because right now it's not displaying items nicely. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to change our style to subtitle, to right detail. And what we'll do is we'll double click on title and we'll change its color to white. And we can also change the subtitle to white as well. The final item we're going to want to update is the table view cell itself now has a default background color, and we're going to want to change that to clear. So make sure you have table view cell selected in your scene, and in the attributes inspector scroll down and find the view section and update the background color to clear color. Now we can go ahead and run our application, and we see that now our data label is showing up much nicer. We now have this subtitle that we're going to be able to update as well. Obviously, we do not want our space data table view controller to display the string of data 5 times. That would be silly. Instead, our goal is to have our table view display the data of a particular space object. In order to do that, we're going to have to add a property to our header file of the space data view controller. So below the add property UITableView table view, we're going to say add property strong non-atomic, and we're going to be able to add a space object here, which means that we need to import this first. So we're going to type import space object OW space object at the top of our header file here. And now we can use the class OW space object, and we'll call the variable space object as well. So now we're going to go into the OW space data view controller.m, and we're going to update the number of rows in our table view. So right now we're going to say return 8 instead of return 5 in the method number of rows in section. So why are we going to use 8? Well, we will have one cell for each property of our OW space object, and that happens to be 8. We also need to update our method cell4row@indexPath, and instead of cell.textLabel.text, we're going to remove this line of code. We're instead going to use a switch statement, which is kind of like a variant of an if statement, in order to display our information on the table view properly. So we're going to be able to type switch indexPath.row, and we can add curly braces, and we'll write case 0, and we can write cell.textLabel.text is equal to nickname, and we can also say cell.detailTextLabel.text is equal to space self.spaceObject.nickname. And then it's really important that we add this line of code here, and we simply say break. And we'll talk about what's going on here in just a minute, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to add cases for all of our rows. So we're going to write case 1, and we'll write cell.textLabel.text is equal to diameter in kilometers, and we'll add a colon and a semicolon at the end here. It's the end of our statement. We can write cell.detailTextLabel.text. Well, the space object's diameter happens to be a float, so we're going to have to use a format string here. So we can type string with format at quote %f, which takes a variable argument of type float. So we can say space object, self.spaceObject, and we're going to say dot diameter, and at the end of this we're also going to type break. And now we can do case 2, and we're going to write cell.textLabel.text is equal to gravitational force, and we'll add a colon, and we can say cell.detailTextLabel.text is equal to string with format, and we're going to do at quote %f, and we can pass in self.spaceObject.gravitational force, and again we're going to add break. Now we can do case 3, and let's type cell.textLabel.text, and we can say this is the length of a year and we'll do this in days. And we can add our detailed text label. And this is also going to be a format string. So we're going to type in a string with format. We'll do at quote %f, and we're going to do self.spaceObject.yearLength. And we can break, and we'll do case 4 next. And this is going to be cell.textLabel.text is equal to length of a day, hours. And we'll say cell.detail.textLabel.text is equal to, and again we're going to use a format string here, so it's going to be in a string with format at quote %f self.spaceObject.dayLength, and we can type break in again, and we're going to do our case 5. We're almost there. And in case 5, we're going to say cell.textLabel.text is equal to temperature, and we're going to do Celsius. And we'll add a quote and a semicolon. We can say cell.detailTextLabel.text is equal to, and a string with format at quote %f, comma, self.spaceObject.temperature. And we can break again, and we'll say case 6. And we'll say cell.textLabel.text is equal to number of moons. And we'll say cell.detailTextLabel.text is equal to, and a string with format. And instead of %f, we're going to use %i here because this is going to be an integer. So we're going to say self.spaceObject.number of moons. And we'll break again. And we'll say case 7. And here we'll simply say cell.textLabel.text is equal to interesting fact. And we'll say cell.detailTextLabel.text is equal to self.spaceObject.interesting fact. And we'll break here as well. Finally, we need to type one more line of a little bit of code here. We can say default, and we'll say break. And I'm going to reposition this default so it lines up nicely with all my cases. So let's talk about what's going on here. Well, the method self_ArrowIndexPath actually gets called over and over and over again. Each time you load a row into your table view, this method gets called. So in our case, we're going to be loading up 8 rows into our table view. So this method self_ArrowIndexPath will be called 8 times. And we'll talk more about this data source method in the future. But for now, just know that this method is going to be called 8 times. So each time we call this method, and let's say we're starting at row 0, our case 0 is going to evaluate, and it's going to update our cells text label.text, and it's going to make that nickname. It's also going to update the detail text label to our space object's nickname. And then we're going to break, which means we're going to end our case, and we're going to go to return the cell down here. So let's say we were at row 5, which is case 4. We would only evaluate this code, and again we would break and go down to return cell. Now what is this default break? Well, think about this as the else you learned about when we did if, else if, else if, else. Default break here is just what happens if none of these evaluate to true, none of our cases. Well, in that case we don't want to do anything, so we're just going to simply say go to the end here and return a cell, which means that we're not going to do anything to our cell in that case. So what are why are we using a switch statement instead of an else if? Well, I'm kind of doing this for brevity. The use case for a switch statement is actually pretty rare because it has to be an integer here, right? It has to be case 0 or case 1, whereas if statements give us a lot more flexibility on doing comparisons. However, you will see switch statements from time to time when you're coding, so it's nice to know how they work.